Welcome back for part 3 of our Canning Basics series. I'm Mindy Turner with the Curry County Cooperative Extension Service, your family and consumer science agent. For this series, we have been looking at just the basics of canning, what you need to know if you're interested in home food preservation, what the processes are, what proper equipment might be, and some of the food safety concerns we need to be aware of. So we are going to talk this time a little bit about the processing and the storage of our home canned items. So as I've mentioned before, we're using information from our New Mexico State University Master Food Preserver course. This is just a little snippet of everything that is included in that to get you started thinking about this is something you're interested in. What would you need to have? What are the considerations? And mostly to help us understand, we're going to use the appropriate resources and make sure what we're doing is safe and healthy for our families. Because we know home canning is a time-honored way to preserve food, but safe results are going to depend on that science, the approved methods, and using tested procedures. So we're looking at, through this month's newsletter and this series, some of those basic principles that we need to be aware of. So like I said, this time we're going to talk about the processing and understand that it doesn't just end when the timer goes off. There are specific things that have to happen after. Okay, we're going to use the appropriate processing time and the appropriate method for the size of jars, the type of food we have. But even after that, there are things, the cooling, the sealing, the labeling, all of those things that are going to affect the quality of those items. So one of the things you're going to see, and your recipe is going to designate to you which of these methods you're going to use. But just for the concept of home canning itself, to know what a hot pack versus a raw pack is. When we talk about hot pack, that means that we heat the food before we put it into a hot jar. Okay, the jars are going to be warm. We're going to warm that jar up, and the food itself is going to be hot. We're going to follow those instructions for heating because it's going to vary depending on what the item is and what recipe you're using. Generally, this is going to be preferred for a product with a high quality appearance, right? Because we don't lose a lot of the beautiful coloring and the things when it goes into that jar. So that's a hot pack. Raw pack means that the jar's heated and it's freshly prepared, but the food is not. Okay, the food goes in raw, just like it is, and the jar itself is warm. So those are the two different varieties of things that you will hear about, the process you'll hear people talk about, just so you kind of understand what that means. But again, your recipe is going to tell you which of those to use based on your food. Okay, the other term we hear a lot when we talk about home canning is headspace. So when we talk about the headspace, it's literally how much space is at the top of that jar. So when you fill the jar, whether you're hot packing or raw packing, you have to consider how much space do I need at the top. Too much space is going to allow too much air to be trapped in that jar. Not enough space, it's not going to allow for expansion during the processing phase. So it's that's actually between the underside of the lid and where the food starts, okay, is going to be the headspace in your jar. And so when we look at, there's a table here that goes over specifically what headspace you need. Again, a lot of recipes or processing information is going to give you this information, but overall, you're going to need about 1/4 of an inch for your fruit spreads. They don't expand a lot when you put them in there. Fruits, tomatoes, pickles, other acid products, about 1/2 an inch, because in the temperature, they could have some expansion. When you do vegetables or other low acid foods, especially using a pressure canner, that high temperature and high pressure is going to cause that to expand. You're probably going to need about 1 inch of headspace at the top of that jar. And then your high starch foods really expand. So your starchy vegetables, you're going to want to allow 1 1/4 to 1.5 inches of headspace when you fill that jar so that there's some room for expansion once it is processed. So I said before that we would talk about altitude and adjusting for our elevation. So all of New Mexico is considered high elevation. So that's an important thing for us to remember and consider. we vary pretty much from 3,000 to 10,000 feet across. Curry County itself ranges from about 4,100 to 4,600 feet. You can get the specific elevation to your location and where you live. You can Google it. You can call the county clerk's office and get that information off of the county map. There's a lot of ways that you can find that information. It's important to understand that the boiling temperature of liquids is lower at higher elevations, and therefore food has to be processed longer or at a higher pressure at a high elevation. So here's a couple of tables that give you, again, the basic adjustments for your elevation, what you need to think about related to the pressure, okay, and the time of the processing. Because we said you need to follow your SP, you need to look at that processing time based on the type of food that it is, as well as the size of your jar. But now we're going to throw another king in there, and you have to think about your elevation. Okay, so there's a lot of science behind what we do for home canning, and that's why it's important to not guess, to use actual scientific facts to make sure that you have safe food that you can store and keep. Okay, so you can see right here when we specifically look at where we fall for Curry County, that 4,001 to 6,000 feet in elevation, pounds of pressure are going to be 13 pounds of pressure. Okay, instead of sometimes we see that standard of 10, what that's going to look like. Or if we're doing like boiling water canning, we're going to add to that processing time. And here we're going to fall through that 3,000 to 6,000. And so we're going to add 10 minutes to whatever processing time they give us. So we take what's in the recipe and add 10 minutes to that to have it appropriate. And so if you're not Curry County, you can look at the tables and figure out where you fall in that adjustment. So it's important, once we've processed it, the timer goes off, okay? It's time to cool these jars. And so it's important to think about how do we cool them appropriately and safely. So we're going to turn off the heat in a boiling water canner, turn off the heat, remove the canner lid, and we're going to let them sit in there for about 5 minutes. With a pressure canner, we're going to wait about 10 minutes after the pressure is dropped to 0. So the petcock has been opened, whatever form or fashion of a pressure canner you're using should have instructions for you how to release the pressure safely, again, to let the steam out. So this is where you're going to want to do that and then wait another 10 minutes for those cans to start cooling, your jars that are in there. Once that has happened in the canner, boiling water or pressure, we're going to remove those hot jars with a jar lifter. Okay, we just want to grab them. They're still going to be hot. We don't want to tilt them. We want to lift them up straight and not shake them around. We're going to place them on a dry towel or a baking cake cooling rack that we can put them on, not just on a flat surface where it's going to retain the heat, with about 1 inch of space between the jars. So don't stack them up right on top of each other so that the cool air can kind of get all around them to cool them off. And then we want them at room temperature for about 12 to 24 hours to make sure they're allowed to cool completely. Then the screw bands can come off for storage, and we can take those screw bands off and then reuse them, wash them, take them for the next project while we store our items. So when we store them, we want to wipe them off. We want to wash the lid and the jar, make sure that there's not food residue on that or anything else that could cause a problem. So we're going to rinse them, we're going to dry them, we're going to label them with the date and what's in them so that we know what we've got, and then we're going to store them in a clean, cool, dark, dry place. If the cabinet is fine, we just want to make sure that we have them put away. 50 to 75 degrees is what enhances that retention of a quality. So obviously that's typically around the room temperature. We do not want them above 95 degrees. So of course here in New Mexico, that means we're not going to store them out in an outbuilding, a shed, a garage, somewhere that is going to heat up and not have some type of a climate control, because they're either going to freeze part of the year or get way, way too hot. And that's definitely going to affect the quality and the safety of those items. Properly canned food that's stored like we're telling you here can be retained for up to a year, okay, or more. So that's an important piece in if we're really wanting to preserve these items, that's a great way to do it. So here's an example of a hot pack recipe. These are just canned peaches. It talks to you about what would go in there and some of the things you would need to do. Now, again, any of the recipes that I'm sharing with you are just the basics. You would need to follow the complete instructions along with whichever process that is outlined here for what you need to do, as well as reading and understanding the instructions on your own equipment. Again, I'm Mindy Turner with the Curry County Cooperative Extension Service, your family and consumer science agent. This has been part 3 of our Canning Basics series. We will be back for part 4 to round it out and get you some of that basic introductory information as to how to do home food preservation.